already.
Thank you. Good evening. Ms. Holbert, if you are ready, I am ready to call the meeting to order.
Yep, thank you.
Sure. So we will have begin with our roll call. Ms. Holbert.
Present.
Ms. Whitsett.
Here.
Ms. Delay.
Here.
And Ms. Walkman. Here. Oh, very good. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And we can take a look at the minutes from the October 11th board meeting, or policy committee meeting. And we'll be looking to have those approved. There a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting? Ms. Holbert. Thank you, Ms. Whitsett. Okay. Great. Very good, thank you. And for this evening's meeting, we are going to start with looking at our second reading. So policies and administrative regulations that were brought to last month's meeting for the first time. As a first read, we're going to look at those tonight. For a second read, and we'll start with 805 district-wide safety and the accompanying AR. Any questions, comments, or concerns about that before we move on? So, okay, very good. Policy 914, relations with intermediate unit. Questions about that? Seeing none. Policy 915, relations with parent organizations. Again, that is a second read.
You're not doing 9805 AR as a second read?
I was doing them combined, but did you have something on the AR that you wanted to discuss?
No, I just didn't know.
Just to make sure we didn't miss it. Okay. So 915, there were no questions, and 918, Title I parent and family engagement. Questions or comments? Okay, excellent, very good. And then really more just for informational, but policies that would be repealed, in part because of the changes that we've made to the other policies. Policy 908, relations with parents and guardians. Policy 909, municipal government relations. Policy 912, relations with educational institutions. And policy 917, parent and family engagement. Do you have any questions, concerns, or second thoughts about repealing these? Unfortunately, we don't have any public here for public comments, so we will continue on with our agenda and move to policies and ARs that we are presenting to you tonight for a first reading. And we'll start with policy 105.1, and I will turn it over to Mr. Jazz.
Sure. So policy 105.1, 105.2, and 105.3 are kind of the intro into the 100 and the 200 series policies. Most of those, or many of those policies, are policies that we'll look at in future months based on some of the recommendations in the curriculum audit. 105.1, 105.2 especially are pretty standard policies. The legal standard for parent review of curriculum and instructional materials, and the process by which you can seek exemption from specific instruction or state assessments. All of that language is from code. So there's not a lot of customization that generally takes place with these policies, but they served as a good, again, a good intro into the curriculum and student policy work that we'll be doing in future months. So as we move into 105.1, this is the policy for review and curriculum instruction, review of curriculum and instructional materials by parents or guardians. Parents, guardians have those rights. If their child is 18 or over, those rights move to be with the student. And some of the content was moved to an administrative regulation specifically regarding the process by which the district handles those requests. as a general matter, parents have an opportunity to come in. They can look at curriculum materials, and there's a process by which you can opt out of any specific instruction, although the opt-out is part of the next policy. So 105.1 is just about review of the materials.
I do.
I did have a few on this one. So I noticed that there seems to be a shift from where we were, which refers to the opportunity to review, have access to information about the curriculum, to the opportunity to review the curriculum. And I wondered, is that tied to a legal change in the law about accessing the curriculum itself?
So the curriculum, no, not necessarily. I think this language most likely more closely tracks the regulation language.
Yeah, am I reading it correctly? Because it looks as if how it currently reads is that you have the opportunity to have access to information about the curriculum.
Mhm.
And the way I'm reading it now is you have access to the curriculum. Am I reading it correctly? Or are we striking out the information about the curriculum?
the entitlement is to review the curriculum.
And it reads the way it should.
So,
To have information about in an opportunity in districts. Oh, okay, the information about an opportunity to review.
I think, and we might just be parsing words here, but generally,
Okay,
the curriculum is not necessarily just like a document. And it may look different at different levels. So when you just say information about the curriculum, parents have the right to review the curriculum. What that looks like varies by level, by course. So I don't think there was any intentional pivoting going on here,
okay.
but it's a good question.
Well, and then I also wondered, so it looks like the legal references that follow are struck out. And I wondered, is there a reason for that? You know, the one and the two are
Those are just, so those legal references were retained at the bottom of the document. They just weren't hyperlinked with the new language. Like they're still in there though. Those references aren't going away. Those are still the correct references. I'm going to confirm that, but yeah, like number two, those references are still incorporated.
And just so the committee members are aware, after the board approves, gives a final approval after a second reading of policy, we then send our version of it back to PSBA and they review it and make sure that all the legal citations that need to be in there are.
okay.
So
And
even if we've
they'll
accidentally
hyperlink
edited something out, yeah, they'll take care of it.
Okay.
Etc.
Yeah, and there was just one more thing I wanted to ask about this one. Assessment techniques under definitions. I'm sorry, what I'm asking is, so assessment techniques is mentioned in the AR, but not in the policy itself. And I wondered, I mean, assessment techniques seem vague to me. I'm not sure what that means. So I wondered if there was value to reading in the definitions, or is this just sort of, like you said, it's language that's
So
sort of
the language lifted, and I'll read it here. The language lifted directly from the code, from the code of the Board of Education language says, school entities shall adopt policies to assure that parents or guardians have the following. And number one says, access to information about the curriculum, including academic standards to be achieved, instructional materials, and assessment techniques.
Okay.
None of those terms are defined in the code here. But we adopt that policy language so that if we have information about how students are assessed against the standards, right? So you have academic standards that are to be met in each course. And if there is information about how in a particular course, students are assessed to determine whether they've met those standards, that information is available to parents. I can't tell you I have a great definition for what that exactly means. If we have it, we provide it though.
Oh, okay, so that's why we provided it for instructional materials and curriculum, but not for assessment techniques. Is that? Oh, you're saying if we have.
The definitions on instructional materials and curriculum are our own attempts to define those terms as we understand them. Those are not necessarily legally defined terms.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it was curious to me that we attempted to define those assessment techniques, and it's not. But it's mentioned in the article. It was just an observation.
Okay.
You know, not saying we should or shouldn't, we just.
Technique is what, summative assessment?
I don't
Formative
know, what
assessment?
is an assessment? What is,
There's so many.
sure, but
Assessment
there's so many
techniques that-
instructional. Sure, yeah, but that's. an
So you want a
example.
specific?
No, I
No,
know.
I
I
don't want
don't
anything.
Oh,
Specific. I mean. it
what,
was just
what clarification? Are you saying you want some additional clarification or is it too vague?
No, as I said, it just struck me as curious that we defined the others, not that one.
Oh,
So
not
I
that
wondered
one.
if there was a reason why,
Okay,
that it was just, I was noticing.
okay.
I don't have a suggestion or a, you know, need for it to be there, I just.
I think if a parent came in and said, I'd like to review the curriculum for seventh grade social studies, and I'd like to understand how students are assessed. Someone internally would be able to provide it, whether it be a department
Whether it be a
chairperson.
test, whether it be a project.
I think I think assessment techniques is a term that people sort of understand what that means. Like, that's how, like, what are the techniques that you're using to assess students? Sometimes there is confusion over what curriculum is. Some people believe that curriculum is every sheet of paper, every worksheet that's handed out in class. So sometimes we try to define those terms to say this is generally what we interpret to be curriculum or instructional materials. I think the thought is that assessment techniques sort of speaks for itself. But to Dr. Marcy's point, I don't even know how we would define that term because I think it just varies.
Well, I wonder too, I mean, now that we're talking about it, I remember reading somewhere that it's not, you know, you wouldn't be able to do a test, for example. But that is an assessment, so I can see someone saying, well, assessment techniques.
You know,
But
And I
the
cannot
technique
see-
itself is the task or the project or the, portfolio. It's not. The technique. But the technique is different from the actual assessment. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand.
So it's like, but what technique are you using to assess my child? We're gonna give them a test at the end. But we're not, but you don't get to see the test, memorize it.
Is there a value to specifying that or not?
That they don't get to view the actual test.
What exactly?
I think we say in the definition of instructional materials, because that's where some people, obviously, assessment techniques. A technique doesn't imply that you have a right to the assessment.
Oh, it says it right here.
But some people will say, well, to my point earlier about curriculum instruction, people will say, oh, I get to see the test. And that's why that's called out.
Yeah.
I think the policy, if you were asking my opinion, I think it's okay as written. Mainly because I believe that if a parent genuinely had a question, there are appropriate people to contact that would provide that information. So I think I would say we're okay. That's my.
I think I hear more that there's not a variety of ways in which to assess my child more than anything else when we start having conversations with families about what they can see. It's like my child does not do well with this type of test. It would seem to me these are the only 3 things you use in your class. Is there another way in which you can find a way to assess my child's understanding? It's the stuff I get more often than anything else when a parent's requesting to either review a document or ask about what strategy or technique are we using.
The public discourse these days seems to be less about, you don't hear a lot about how are we assessing, you hear about what are we teaching or what are we not teaching and why. Not about, people either agree with what public schools are teaching or they don't. As opposed to, I agree with your teaching, but I don't agree with how you're assessing it, right? You get the latter scenario much less frequently. Usually if you have a parent who has a concern about curriculum, it's about what is being taught rather than how it's being assessed. Usually, it's not a categorical statement, but the overwhelming majority of the time are about what is being taught or not taught.
I had just 2 questions related to that data.
I do have something with that.
Yeah,
No, go ahead.
okay. One was I wanted to actually maybe this is one policy. The policy is applicable just to parents, guardians, or students at school, not to. The policy does not apply to a general community member who is looking for information. I just wanted to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly, and it's stated as such because of the statute provides.
Parents have a right under the school code to this access. If a community member requested access, they could request access through the right to know law. And at times, those requests have to get reviewed because certain materials are copyrighted or can't be reproduced. And so it's not that people can't have access, but sometimes they have to come in and they can view, they can't print, they can't take it with them. But parents have a separate right. They don't have to go through the right to know process to have the access.
And then the other item was that related to item 4 in the AR.
Okay.
Would there ever be circumstances in which the scope of what somebody's requesting, like providing it within the 10 days, do we have the option to extend that under statute if there's a standing circumstances?
We have to see it in 10 days. That's how I.
Respond within 10 days, designating the time and location. So
Okay.
basically within 10 days, and the district could say, we need 30 days to compile this. You can come in after December 6th.
Mine was a pretty narrow comment on 6 because there is similar language in a later AR. So I'm going to come back to this that I thought like expressed the same idea slightly better. It's very parallel about taking notes or removing any materials. And I just noticed what really caught my eye in 6 was the photocopying of contents. Like people are just going to whip out their phone. You know, they're not going to ask them to photocopy it unless you're going to take their phone or frisk them or something, but we're not gonna do that, so,
Well,
you know, I was
don't
just, what I was
take
really
their
thinking
phone.
is,
If they're going into a place that's provided by the school, and you know that they're gonna use their phone, you can ask them to leave their phone outside.
this is the question, this is my question. Something along those lines, like photocopy seemed like it's a little old fashioned for today's technology.
So usually someone would sit in the room, usually a district representative would sit in the room with the person. And there could be scenarios where certain material, the district might agree to photocopy it. The issue is that sometimes those materials are not ours. We purchase them, or we purchase a certain number of copies, and we can't just have people photocopying. If someone comes in and takes a picture of something that they're not supposed to, in some ways they assume that risk on their own if they do something they're not supposed to. But usually a district representative can sit in with anyone. The same thing if they were reviewing a personnel file or videos or anytime a parent's coming in to review district records, usually someone accompanies them so that they're not.
And I think that that is actually spelled out again in the later PR.
Okay.
So maybe, I guess my request is when we get to that one, I have notes on that one too. Like, I was like, oh yeah,
We'll
this is like
compare
a
back
better,
and forth.
yeah.
Okay, sure.
maybe you can work.
Yeah.
That's all. Okay, anything else about 105.1, the policy of the ER?
I was just gonna say along those lines with the photocopy / phone, and this, I'm just noticing this now. I'm sure this appears in any of our policies, but a written request, is that included with our communication?
Of course.
No, is that?
Yeah,
okay.
always,
Is that-
always. Yeah, always.
And then just one other thing, I noticed that it doesn't mention students 18 or older who might be capable of making the decision due to a disability, and I wondered, is that because of a change in the law or?
So so generally the rights transfer to students at 18. However, for students that have an IEP, educational decision rights remain with parents through 21. So in those cases, a parent could still invoke those rights.
So is it just one that we don't have to specify that anymore? Is that what it is?
Yeah, yep.
I understand. I just didn't know that, but given it's-
All right, so 105.2 is the exemption from specific instruction or state assessments. Most of the policy is general and defines specific instruction and state assessments, and then essentially says that the process by which individuals can make the requests is in the AR. So you'll see there's a section of the AR regarding specific instruction, and there's a section regarding state assessments. And there are procedures for opting out of that instruction or assessment for religious reasons.
I don't know if it's a comment in this or in the AR, but I was concerned that with religious exemptions, it doesn't take into effect, because it says the child still has to be present in school when they're exempt. But if it's a Hindu or a Muslim religion, they might be required to go to the mosque that day for prayer. So shouldn't they be excused from school?
So we have an attendance policy that addresses all of those things. Requests to leave school for religious holidays, religious instruction, things like that. This is only if something is being taught in school by the district that a family says that material is in conflict with my religion. So if you're teaching a story about a wizard, in some religions, magic is not something to be spoken about, right? So the family may say, I don't want my child present when you're talking about what the wizard is doing because we don't believe in those things. The student can be excused from class, from that discussion. They might go to another classroom or another supervised area during the time that instruction is taking place, but they're still in school. Now, if the school day is just progressing like a regular school day, and a child has a need because of some sort of religious obligation to leave school, that's our attendance policy that would come into play, and the student would be able to be excused per the attendance policy. Okay.
About the,
Good.
105.3 is the educational research involving the district and district staff. Many years ago, most districts had fairly not very restrictive policies around educational research. And just over time, with just concerns about student privacy and the amount of data that can be collected in short amounts of time, public school entities have become more skeptical of research. Many times these requests, they're not very frequent from my experience. But generally they might even be our own teachers who might be in advanced degree programs or pursuing a doctorate degree. And as part of a dissertation or some course requirement, they have to conduct certain educational research. And there are times when the administration can determine that it's appropriate with proper parent notification, opportunities to opt out, making sure that administration receives copies of anything that's going to be shared. But as a general matter, the policy sort of sets, it's a limiting policy to begin with, and then outlines some exceptions, as opposed to a policy that says we do this research and just carves some things out. In other words, you want if a request comes in, it should be fully vetted. And if the district wants to honor the request, and sometimes there are reasons, sometimes it's our own administrators who are in a program and you want to honor the request. So that's why you'll see that in some cases it's permitted, but it generally requires approval at the central office. This goes well with the student surveys policy that the committee adopted. I guess that was probably last school year at this point.
So not for anybody else's, I did forward some questions related to, how often this takes place in instances where completely understandable. I just forwarded my concerns. And like you said, this is a floor, so they can have, so I'm sure you can ask for whatever you want when the person comes in with the idea. So I was looking for something that said that you look for institutional review board approval, because it does protect classy children.
There is
things
no,
like that. So
data
also.
there is no, my experience, I've never approved any research unless it was vetted and confirmed in the process.
Okay.
And two, I am very, very stingy with allowing individuals to do research.
I know you are.
Yeah.
I've heard, but like this is gonna live, who knows?
Yeah.
So I think that was.
And it's hard for me to say that considering it was very hard for me to get approval to do my dissertation in my district, and I was resentful as a result of that. It took a very long time, and I was an employee, and I felt offended. However, when the shoe was on the other foot and I saw it from a different perspective, I understood. And it was very clear that student privacy was utmost, even with the RB process, and I appreciated later the assistant superintendent who reviewed and asked a million and one question and had a formal interview with me about that. And wanting to make sure that does this benefit the district, and what can we learn from your research that would help advance some of our work. If we can't find an alignment, then we have to go a separate way. So I do know we've offered some opportunities for staff to finish their doctoral studies, all go through an IRB process, but they're normally with adults very different than with student like that.
And sometimes the staff can come from staff
Yeah,
instead. That's just as valuable.
yeah, but they come frequently. Doctoral students are always emailing superintendents at a rapid rate, explaining their IRB process and bringing in all the documentation. Thank you, but no thanks at this time.
You know, so I thought about that to restart this. What am I asking for? And I don't want to, that's a good question. I don't think I want to like sit that much, but you know, I was curious about the actual, like, what goes on behind the scenes. You know, logistically when a request is made for protection. So I think if, you know, it sounds like this is kind of probably a best practice among school districts, that it's just understood that this is what happens.
And parents always get notification. So even if the district were to give approval to something, that some may say, oh, I wouldn't have given my approval for that. There's always a process by which you can say, I don't want anything to do with that. We're not, nobody's forcing anyone to speak.
Right.
The parents will get a formal letter describing the IRB process and what exactly it looks like. If your institution does what it's supposed to do, most of us with our dissertations had to do it. But I don't know if there are other districts who specifically identify the IRB in their policy. Diazio, are you familiar with that? Not that you should be in there.
I'm not aware,
but I just know that it's always the expectation if you're trying to work with children, you're coming from a accredited institution, that the IRB process as part of your dissertation is a non-negotiable. Yeah, the IRB.
But,
Yeah.
but my concern about including the process in the AR is that not every student is in a dissertation program, right? They're not in a doctoral program that would require it. So, you know, I mean, even our student teachers, before they're student teachers, oftentimes in a field observation, they're asked to interview teachers.
Yeah.
You know, and that certainly wouldn't be an IRB process, but they're interviewing staff and they're asking not necessarily information about students, but they're asking about the career and things in the district and what do you like about your job, what do you not, those kinds of things. And so that wouldn't.
You don't want to hinder that kind of.
But if you're working with children, you have an IRB process. I can understand not working with adults.
right?
But if you're doing a formal research,
Yeah.
there's no not a accredited institution that was trying to change the IRB process. But I guess if a staff member was doing a master's of the thesis and they wanted to conduct interviews with staff, I'm a little bit more lenient than that.
Right.
Than if they wanting to, now when you involve children, then I think it's a totally different scenario. For the person who wants to do research, even though they are focusing on the teacher, they want to have access to the students, be able to sit in the classroom while the teacher is teaching, but they're really focusing on the teacher, but they're also documenting how the student is reacting to that. That's a set of data points that are student focused. So I'd be really mindful about what process are you going through, and is it anonymous the way in which you are doing that? Then to me becomes an R&B conversation. If it's solely with adults, yeah.
So does anybody have any other, anything to do to this? I hate to say this, but, can we go back to 105.2 AR real quick? That's where I found that language that I was. It was under exemption from state assessments.
Okay.
At the very end. Photocopying, duplicating, and writing down the content of any state assessment of the accompanying test directions during such reviews were prohibited. I think it did say in here somewhere that they were gonna, somebody was gonna sit with them. District personnel must be present, right? So there was some language in here that I thought was probably like worked better than the language, but
So incorporate some of the 105.2 language into 105.1.
I just thought that it was
Okay.
yeah, more comprehensive, but that's it for me. Right.
Yeah, this is good. We'll probably have a lengthier agenda for December, and definitely by January. I think we'll be looking at definitely the homeless students policy next month.
Okay.
And there's another one. Yeah, there'll be a policy on economically disadvantaged students and how we go about providing them with support, because the free and reduced lunch data can't be used for those purposes without like affirmative consent. So we have a creative policy that we'll present with the goal of helping at-risk students without violating the I think it's the USDA requirements around what you can use free and reduced lunch hours for. So those are two things that'll be coming forth, and then probably some policies in the other policies in the 100 and 200 series. It'll be a busy spring.
We're expecting.
Yeah.
Something came up in the opportunity. I don't know if anyone reads the press. And I noticed an article in there about the homework policy, which happens to be policy 10.
Which one?
Homework.
Homework. Okay.
That's it's homework. And there was this article about how ours hasn't been revised since 2001, and the students were comparing out the districts where there's a little more specificity.
Sure.
So I just, that caught my eye since we weren't going to be doing.
Yep. I imagine that's probably one that was identified. Correct.
Yes.
Read it. It's.
Yeah.
It's
I think Dr. Marseille is smiling because where he came from, there was a lengthy study on homework. The committee just wrapped up its work 2 months ago, and we have a new policy on homework that was just adopted. It took 4 years.
Oh no.
So
I wonder it hasn't been revised since 2000.
but it cleared the finish line about 2 months ago.
Well, that was that. There was another one too before that one. In terms of more policy. Yeah, I think we oftentimes don't go to the root of some of the challenges that students are facing. And I won't say too much, but now I'm invested more in China's homework. I promised I was not going to get involved until 8th grade. I figured everything's gonna be okay, but 8th grade is a pivotal point where I'm gonna get involved. More so as a dad. But there are 50 million different ways in which individuals think about them. The intent of it, its purpose, and sometimes I'm not sure if it's to provide clarity, to check for understanding, or just to keep students occupied and do some level of work. And when you don't have a coherent set of procedures, what often happens is when people say stress haven, one of the factors that contributes to that is the inconsistency in the expectation from it. I'm not saying that there's not research that supports it, I think there is, but done well and done effectively, followed by the research makes sense, especially when you're looking at it at a developmental stage, because there's a specific set of recommendations for elementary, a specific set for middle school, and a specific set for high school. Then you get into the conversation, well, are you going to limit homework for AP, right? And that's not the intent, is to think about how can it be more intentional and more deliberate. And more importantly, after that, how do you make sure that educators are on the same page? So there's not 7 hours of homework.
Well, that was the crux of the articles, the amount of stress they're experiencing, some students, and I would venture to say probably a lot of students,
Yeah.
not just the students who wrote the article, but.
Yeah, it's like we're talking about in your office, Dr. Conley, in your previous district with respects to the total number of tests.
Yes.
They are given in one day, because there's not a schedule or a calendar or a cross communication in terms of that.
I proposed to my team when I became principal that we're going to have a testing schedule. So you couldn't have more than 2 assessments in one day. And it was interesting. It took a couple of years to really dig in. It was, because everybody wants to give a test on a Friday. And I think what I found as an assistant principal is we had this policy that a student could come to an assistant principal and say, I have 3 tests today. And then somehow the assistant principal could say, well, you only have to take 2 or 3, or whatever the number was. And I said, that puts the assistant principal in a weird spot because they don't know what the other assessments are. So working with my building leadership and my teachers, we agreed on a kind of a Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. And it seemed to go pretty well. We were very similar clientele to Wallingford-Swarthmore and students, multiple AP classes, multiple tests. And it certainly was something that I worked on with students, and I worked on with student council and my teacher leaders. And we got to a place where I think everybody was comfortable. I think the one thing that was tricky was if Friday is my test day and the kids aren't ready, can I just give it to the next class? And my big thing was, as long as you communicate to the students and their parents, yeah, we're going to move our test day, and you're also sharing with your colleagues. So there was that sense of we don't all live in a vacuum when we teach. So we're working with kids, and they have multiple classes outside of just my English class. So it was important. It was an important conversation but it took a couple years.
And some of it is like in the elementary school, there's some teachers that don't believe in homework.
Sure.
And that's their philosophy.
Sure.
And the way our district is, they can do that. They can say there's in second grade, I don't think it's appropriate to give out homework.
Sure.
But other teachers are giving out homework.
And I think if we really believe in wellness, which is one of our strategic initiatives, that is an important conversation to have with families and students.
Well, I share with a parent at a community meeting that yes, we want to look at time. We want to take a look at school start time. If they ask, when are we going to change? I don't see it specifically identifying the strategic plan. And I said, if we don't change the internal structure and preparing for that, it's all for naught. Because if you don't look at the way in which we are using time and students are using that experience, then changing the school time is not going to change anything if you still are bombarded with hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of assignments from each and every single educator at a consistent I found value, and there were times where, in a previous district, we spent a long time with the elementary staff, reviewing the research, connecting it to practice, and then coming up with a sensible way of thinking, what do we think, at the elementary level, X amount of minutes that students should be engaged in that particular experience. And we did it, at the secondary level as well. We also were very clear that, particular, holidays were off limits. Because at the end of the day, I know there's a lot to cover. And when you put limitations, people will try to find a way to say, well, I'll get it at the tail end. And sometimes when we shared with individuals, you are not to give major assignments over spring break, period. As an opportunity for individuals to be with their family. Well, sometimes there's enthusiasm to get a lot of stuff covered, especially if you have a national curriculum or a state curriculum or if you're an AP course, where then students get back and then that Monday, they're just bombarded. And they would tell us, well, there's no point. I'd rather have it over the spring break then, if all you're gonna do is wait till I get back to then try to catch me up. So it is a change in philosophy and in practice.
And, that's the conversation we have. We all want to break over winter break, spring break.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's a challenge that we talk about, the Friday before winter break, you don't need 6 tests, right? To what end? Right. So I think that that's the larger conversation about assessment and homework and wellness and stress and all that stuff that our students face and our teachers face too, to some extent. Because I remember my first year teaching, I gave all this homework over winter break, and I came back and I was well rested. The students gave me their writing, and I spent the next month grading all the writing. So I'm like, oh, that was a dumb idea. So I think that we have to kind of just have those conversations.
Yeah.
So that's important.
Very good, thank you. Again, there's no one here for public comment, so that being our meeting for tonight. Our next meeting is scheduled for December 13th. And we will adjourn at 7:49.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.